August 1, 1944. The air in Warsaw tasted like ash and burning timber, even before dawn broke over the Vistula River. Zofia Kowalska pressed her back against the cold brick wall of what used to be a bakery, her fingers wrapped around a cloth bundle that still held the faint warmth of potato bread. She was 16 years old. Her hands were calloused from carrying messages, her boots were 2 sizes too large, and her stomach hadn't been full in 3 years, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was the man bleeding in the rubble, 30 meters away. She could see him through the gap in the collapsed wall, his uniform gray with dust, his helmet askew, one hand clutching his side where the fabric had turned dark and wet, a German soldier, maybe 20 years old, maybe less. His breathing came in short, desperate gasps that echoed off the broken stones around him. Zofia's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd been taught to hate them. Every day for 5 years, she'd been taught to hate them. The soldiers who marched through her streets, who took her neighbor's son in the night, who turned her school into a garrison. The men who made her mother cry into her pillow when she thought no one could hear. But this one was dying. The bread in her hands was meant for the fighters in the old town, men from the home army who'd risen up just hours before, who'd seized German positions with nothing but stolen rifles and grandfather's hunting guns and sheer, desperate courage. The uprising had begun at 5 o'clock that afternoon, and already the city was a maze of barricades and broken glass, and bodies no one had time to bury. Zofia had a mission: get the food to the command post on Kilinskiego Street. Don't stop, don't look back, don't get caught. But the soldier coughed, and the sound was wet and terrible, and Zofia found herself frozen. The morning light was starting to creep over the rooftops now, turning the smoke-filled sky from black to gray to a sickly orange. In an hour, maybe less, the streets would be swarming with German reinforcements. The whispers had already started spreading through the resistance network. Tanks were coming, and Stukas and SS units pulled from the Eastern Front. The uprising might have caught the occupiers off guard, but the retaliation would be swift and merciless. She should move. She should run. Instead, Zofia looked down at the bread in her hands. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, from a time before the war, before the hunger, before the fear became something they wore like second skin. We feed the hungry, Zofia, no matter who they are. That's what separates us from the beasts. But her father's voice was there too, harder, colder, shaped by 5 years of occupation. They are not us. They chose to be here. They chose to burn our libraries and execute our teachers and starve our children. Remember that. The soldier coughed again. His hand slipped from his side, leaving a smear of blood on the broken concrete. Zofia closed her eyes, took a breath, made a choice that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She tore off a piece of the bread, wrapped it in a clean corner of the cloth, and stepped into the open street. The soldier saw her coming and tried to raise his pistol. His hand trembled so badly the weapon clattered against the stones. He said something in German, a word she didn't understand, harsh and desperate. His eyes were blue, impossibly blue, like the sky over the Baltic Sea in summer, before the world went mad. "I'm not going to hurt you," Zofia whispered in Polish, knowing he wouldn't understand. She held up the bread where he could see it, moving slowly, the way you'd approach a wounded dog. I'm just bringing this." The soldier's face was pale beneath the dust and grime, sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning chill. He couldn't have been more than 18. There was no hardness in his features, none of the cold certainty she'd seen in the faces of the SS officers who strutted through the ghetto ruins. Just a boy, just a terrified, dying boy who probably had a mother somewhere praying for him to come home. She set the bread down within his reach and stepped back, her pulse thundering in her ears. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the rubble. Two enemies, two children, two people who should have been in school, arguing about mathematics or gossiping about first kisses, not crouching in the ruins of a burning city with blood on their hands. The soldier's pistol lowered, his fingers uncurled. He reached for the bread with his other hand, moving like every muscle in his body hurt, and brought it to his mouth. He ate slowly, mechanically, his eyes never leaving her face. "Why?" he said finally, the word thick with his accent but unmistakable. Zofia didn't answer. She wasn't sure she had an answer. Instead, she turned and ran, her two large boots slapping against the cobblestones, her heart lodged somewhere in her throat. Behind her, she heard him call out again, "Danke." But she didn't look back. She was 3 streets away when she heard the first shots of the morning firefight echoing through the city. By the time Zofia reached the command post, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold on to what remained of the bread. The building, a former printing house, now converted into a fortress of sandbags and broken furniture, hummed with desperate energy. Men and women, some barely older than Zofia, rushed back and forth, carrying ammunition boxes and medical supplies and messages scrawled on scraps of paper. The smell of gunpowder mixed with sweat and fear and something else, something sharp and metallic that she recognized as blood. "You're late," growled Captain Nowak, a man whose face seemed carved from the same stone as the city's walls. He took the bundle from her hands without ceremony, frowning at its lightness. "This is all? The baker's son was arrested yesterday," Zofia said, which was true. They couldn't make as much. She didn't mention the soldier. Didn't mention the piece she'd given away. The lie sat in her stomach like spoiled meat, but she swallowed it down and met the captain's eyes without flinching. Nowak grunted and turned away, already barking orders at someone else. Zofia stood there for a moment, forgotten, her lungs still burning from the run. Around her, the resistance fighters were preparing for war-checking weapons, reinforcing windows, marking maps, with positions of German strongpoints. They looked like ghosts, she thought, pale and hollow-eyed, moving through the ruined building like spirits who'd already died but hadn't yet realized it. Ghost soldiers, fighting for a ghost country, hoping to resurrect what the Nazis had tried to bury. Zofia. She turned to find Tomasz, a courier like her, though 2 years older and infinitely more confident. He had a smile that seemed out of place in the apocalypse, bright and reckless and somehow reassuring. He'd been the one to recruit her into the resistance 6 months ago, sneaking messages to her between the rotted floorboards of her apartment building. "You okay?" he asked, lowering his voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," she said automatically. Then, because Tomasz had a way of seeing through her lies, she added, "It's bad out there. The Germans are regrouping faster than we thought. We knew it would be bad." Tomasz's smile faded into something harder, older. "But we had to try. We couldn't just wait for the Soviets to liberate us. We had to show the world we were still here, still fighting." Zofia nodded, but the words felt hollow. The Soviet army was supposedly just kilometers away on the other side of the Vistula. Radio Moscow had been encouraging the uprising for weeks. "Rise up," they said. "Fight the fascists. We are coming." But as dawn broke fully over Warsaw, filling the shattered windows with blood-red light, Zofia wondered if anyone was really coming at all. 3 days into the uprising, Zofia stopped counting the bodies. She'd been reassigned from courier duty to medical support, a generous term for what amounted to holding down screaming men, while a veterinary student tried to extract bullets with unsterilized tools. The basement of the printing house had been converted into a field hospital, lit by candlelight and the occasional hissing gas lamp. The smell was indescribable. Blood and gangrene and human waste and the sickly sweet odor of chloroform stretched too thin across too many patients. The wounded kept coming, Home Army fighters with shattered legs and missing fingers, civilians caught in the crossfire, children with shrapnel embedded in their small backs, and sometimes, though no one acknowledged it out loud, German soldiers. The first one arrived on the second night, carried in by 2 resistance fighters who looked deeply uncomfortable with their burden. He'd been shot in the chest during a skirmish near the Saxon Garden, and by some miracle, the bullet had missed his heart. He was unconscious, barely breathing, his face the color of old paper. "We should leave him in the street," one of the fighters muttered. "But doctor, Kowalski, the veterinary student who'd become their chief surgeon by virtue of being the only person present who'd ever held a scalpel, shook his head. "We treat everyone. That's the rule." "What rule?" The fighter spat. "Whose rule? They burn our hospitals. They execute our doctors. We treat everyone, doctor," Kowalski repeated, his voice quiet but unyielding. "Because if we don't, we become them. And then what are we fighting for?" The fighter left without another word, his face twisted with disgust. But the German stayed. Zofia found herself assigned to watch him, keep his bandages clean, give him water if he wakes up, make sure he didn't die before Dr. Kowalski could properly assess his wounds. She sat on an overturned crate in the flickering candlelight, studying the enemy's face. He looked younger and unconscious. Softer. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, white against tanned skin. Had he gotten it during the war, or before in some childhood accident, falling off a bicycle or roughhousing with brothers? "Why did you bring him here?" Zofia asked, when Dr. Kowalski returned to check the German's pulse. The doctor was quiet for a long moment, his fingers on the soldier's wrist, counting heartbeats. He was maybe 30, with wire-rimmed glasses held together with thread and a tiredness that seemed bone-deep. "My wife was a nurse," he said finally, "before they took her. She used to say that the moment you decide who deserves mercy and who doesn't, you've already lost your humanity." He glanced at Zofia, and she saw something raw in his eyes. "I don't know if she was right, but I can't afford to believe she was wrong." The German soldier opened his eyes around midnight. Zofia saw it happen, the sudden tension in his body, the confusion flashing across his face as he tried to place where he was. His hand moved instinctively to his side, searching for a weapon that wasn't there. "Don't move," Zofia said in Polish, then repeated it in German, butchering the pronunciation. "Nicht bewegen." The soldier froze. His eyes found hers in the dim light brown eyes this time, not blue, wide with fear and pain and something that might have been shameful. "Am I a prisoner?" he managed in broken Polish. "You're alive," Zofia replied, which wasn't quite an answer. She lifted a tin cup to his lips. "Drink." He drank, wincing with each swallow, his eyes never leaving her face. When he finished, he let his head fall back against the thin pillow someone had fashioned from bundled rags. "You should have left me," he whispered. "Probably," Zofia agreed. A sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a sob, escaped his throat. "My name is Friedrich Braun. I'm from Leipzig. I have a sister. Her name is Greta, and she's 7 years old, and she collects rocks." The words tumbled out of him like water from a broken dam. "I was supposed to go home in October. I was supposed to—" His voice broke. Zofia said nothing. What was there to say? That his sister might still have a brother? That October was only 2 months away and maybe he'd make it, maybe they all would? The lies stuck in her throat. "There's a girl here," Friedrich continued, his voice growing fainter, "who gave me bread. On the first day, when I was bleeding in the street, I think maybe I dreamed about her. But if I didn't, if she's real, tell her." He paused, struggling for words. "Tell her I'm sorry. For all of it. Tell her I'm sorry." Zofia's hands clenched in her lap. Her nails dug into her palms hard enough to leave marks. "I'll tell her," she whispered. But Friedrich had already slipped back into unconsciousness. August 14th, 1944. The day the sky fell. Zofia was on the street when the first dive bomber screamed out of the morning sun. She'd been carrying water from a miraculously still-functioning well 3 blocks away, 2 buckets balanced on a pole across her shoulders. The air raid siren started wailing, a sound that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat, but this time something felt different, heavier, more final. She looked up and saw them. Dozens of them. Tukas and Heinkels filled the sky like a plague of iron locusts, their engines howling, their wings catching the light, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The first bomb hit the hospital. The explosion picked Zofia up and threw her against a wall. The buckets went flying. Water splashed across the cobblestones, mixing with dust and debris and blood from a cut above her eye that she didn't remember receiving. Her ears rang with a high, piercing whine that drowned out everything else. She tried to stand and couldn't, tried to breathe and choked on smoke and pulverized brick. The world had become a blur of gray and red and orange, punctuated by concussive blasts that felt like fists hammering against her chest. Someone grabbed her arm, pulled her to her feet, dragged her toward a cellar entrance as another bomb struck close enough to make the ground buck and roll like a living thing. Zofia tumbled down stone steps, landing hard on her shoulder, pain shooting through her body in bright white spikes. The cellar was packed with civilians, old women clutching rosaries, children with hollow eyes, a priest murmuring prayers that no one seemed to hear. Zofia pressed her back against the damp wall and tried to count the explosions, but they came too fast, too close together, until the individual blasts merged into one continuous roar. How long did it last? Hours? Days? Time had lost all meaning in the darkness and the shaking and the screaming that came from somewhere above, somewhere outside, somewhere that used to be the world. When the bombing finally stopped, the silence was somehow worse than the noise. Zofia emerged into a city that barely resembled the one she'd left. Entire blocks had been reduced to smoking rubble. Buildings that had stood for centuries were now just foundations and broken walls. The printing house, the command post, was gone. Just gone. Where it had stood was a crater deep enough to swallow a truck. She stood at the edge of that crater, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. The basement hospital had been directly beneath. Dr. Kowalski had been down there. Tomasz had been there too. She'd seen him going down to help move supplies just before the bombing started. Friedrich Braun had been down there. All of them, buried under tons of rubble and broken concrete and twisted metal. Zofia fell to her knees. She didn't cry. There were no tears left in her, hadn't been for days, maybe weeks. She just knelt there in the ash and dust, her hands hanging useless at her sides, while around her the city burned. "Help me." The voice was so faint she almost missed it, barely more than a whisper carried on the smoke-laden wind. "Please, help." Zofia's head snapped up. She scanned the rubble, trying to locate the source. There a hand, pale and bloody, protruding from between two collapsed beams, fingers flexing weakly. She scrambled forward, ignoring the way the unstable debris shifted beneath her, and began pulling away chunks of concrete and plaster. Her hands bled, her back screamed in protest, but she kept digging, kept clearing, until she could see a face beneath the wreckage. Friedrich, somehow, impossibly, alive. "I've got you," Zofia gasped, wedging her shoulder beneath one of the beams and pushing with everything she had. "I've got you. Just hold on." It took an hour to free him. By the time she pulled him clear of the rubble, her entire body was shaking with exhaustion. Friedrich's eyes were barely open, his breathing shallow and rattling. The bandages across his chest had come loose, and fresh blood seeped through his torn shirt. "The others?" he managed. Zofia shook her head. She didn't trust her voice. Friedrich closed his eyes. A single tear cut a clean line down his dust-covered cheek. "Greta," he whispered. "I'll never see Greta again." "Don't," Zofia said fiercely, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "Don't you dare give up. Not after I just dug you out of hell." She didn't know why it mattered. Why this German soldier, this enemy, this representative of 5 years of suffering and occupation and death, should matter to her at all. But as she crouched there in the ruins of her city, with the smoke of 1,000 fires stinging her eyes, she knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't let him die. Not him. Not today. "Can you walk?" she asked. Friedrich nodded weakly. "Then walk." September 2nd, 1944. The uprising was dying. The promised Soviet support never came. The Red Army sat on the eastern bank of the Vistula and watched Warsaw burn. No reinforcements, no supplies, no mercy. Just the steady thunder of artillery that seemed to mock the resistance fighters who'd believed liberation was days away. The home army was running out of everything: ammunition, medicine, hope. Street by street, block by block, the Germans were taking back the city with systematic brutality. The SS had orders to level everything, to erase Warsaw from the map, to punish the Poles for daring to resist. Zofia had found shelter in a half-collapsed church in the Stare Miasto, the old town. 24 survivors huddled in what remained of the nave, beneath a ceiling open to the sky. At night, you could see the stars through the broken roof. During the day, you could see the smoke from burning neighborhoods. Friedrich was still alive, barely. His wound had gotten infected, despite Zofia's best efforts to keep it clean. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes speaking in German to people who weren't there, sometimes reaching out for Zofia's hand like she was the only real thing in a world of ghosts. She'd stopped trying to justify why she was keeping him alive, stopped caring what the other survivors thought when they looked at his uniform. Let them judge, let them hate her. She was too tired to care. Zofia. She looked up to find Father Wojciech, the priest who'd been leading prayers in the cellar during the bombing. He was ancient, at least 70, with hands that trembled constantly and eyes that seemed to see straight through to your soul. "He's dying," the priest said gently, nodding toward Friedrich. "I know. You can't save him. I know that too." Father Wojciech sat down beside her on the broken pew, his joints creaking. For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching Friedrich's labored breathing. "Why do you do it?" the priest asked finally. "Why do you care for him?" Zofia thought about the question, really thought about it, maybe for the first time since that morning she'd given bread to a bleeding soldier in the street. "Because someone has to," she said at last. "Because if we only show mercy to people who look like us, speak like us, believe like us, then what are we fighting for? What's the point of any of this?" She gestured at the ruined church, the shattered city beyond. "He's somebody's son, somebody's brother, and maybe he did terrible things, I don't know. But right now, right here, he's just a boy who's dying far from home. He's the enemy. He was the enemy," Zofia corrected. "Now he's just scared." The priest was quiet for a long time. Then he reached out and placed his weathered hand over hers. "You have your mother's heart," he said. "She would be proud." Zofia's throat tightened. She hadn't seen her mother in 6 days, hadn't seen her father in longer, didn't know if they were alive or dead or buried under rubble somewhere. The not knowing was its own special kind of torture. Friedrich's eyes opened. For a moment, they were clear, focused, more present than they'd been in days. "Zofia," he whispered. He'd learned her name somewhere in the delirium. "Tell me about Warsaw before." So she did. She told him about the cafes on Nowy Świat, where students used to argue about philosophy over bitter coffee, about the way the Vistula looked in winter, frozen solid enough to walk across, about the street musicians and the flower sellers and the sound of church bells on Sunday mornings. She told him about a city that didn't exist anymore, except in memory, and as she spoke, she watched some of the fear leave Friedrich's face. "It sounds beautiful," he murmured when she finished. "It was," Zofia said. "It will be again." Friedrich's hand found hers. His grip was weak, but there was something desperate in it, something pleading. "The girl who gave me bread," he said. "On the first day. That was you, wasn't it?" Zofia nodded, unable to speak. "Why?" It was the same question he'd asked in the rubble, the same question she'd been asking herself for weeks. But now, finally, she had an answer. "Because I wanted to prove that we were different," she said quietly. "That we could be better than the hate. That even in war, there's still room for humanity." She squeezed his hand gently. "I don't know if I succeeded, but I had to try." Friedrich smiled a small, sad smile that made him look even younger than his 18 years. "You did," he whispered. "You did succeed." He died an hour later, as the sun was setting over the ruins of Warsaw. Father Wojciech said prayers over his body, and Zofia cried for the first time in weeks, not just for Friedrich, but for all of them. For Tomasz and Dr. Kowalski and the thousands of ghost soldiers who'd fought and died for a free Poland, for her mother and father and everyone she'd lost, for the city that was dying around her, for the humanity that was so hard to hold on to, when the world was determined to beat it out of you,